All right, everyone, here we go. Welcome in to a very, very special edition of the Eternal Bike Rave. We have got Mark, DJ Solitaire, the man, the myth, the legend, the OG himself, live in studio. Yeah, we're going to be doing a very different kind of experience tonight. We're going to be doing an exploration of Goa Trance. We're going to play some new Goa, a bunch of old Goa. We got some. He brought some DATs to show off. He brought some records. This is a very exciting evening for me.
I mean, it's I think in Canada, us retro Goa fans are few and far between. So it's nice to be able to sort of be on home turf and talk about what I think is a pretty incredible music scene worldwide, and that has been that I've been involved with for 30 plus years. And for you,
I mean,
how long?
Yeah, more like 20 years for me. I mean,
Still quite a while.
I first heard the music in 1996. I met somebody on IRC in the hashtag ambient channel. I was hosting an ambient show on the local college radio. I was 16, but I was
not 16 when I first heard it.
I met a guy who was in Uruguay, and I sent him ambient. We traded audio cassette tapes.
This is
through the mail.
I mean, I think, excuse me, I think that people who are just used to, sort of in the scene the last 10 years, even 20 years, they're just used to the internet. They're used to sort of the incredible ease of availability of this music.
Yeah, just look it up.
And it was just not like that at all. I mean, so when I first went to my first party, it was in Tokyo. So I was already like in a completely different, different culture, different mindset already. And, walked into this club that sort of doesn't look too dissimilar from your apartment in terms of the lighting and colors and all of this sort of stuff. And I was just like, what is this? A wild electronic music. And I didn't know. There was no way, like, how do you look for it? Like,
yeah,
how would you, there's a name on the flyer, but then it's like, well, where do you go look for that? Not everybody had a computer. You didn't go, Google didn't exist, I'm older
even
than
download
Google.
Music. Like, it wasn't a thing.
It wasn't
invented yet.
Exactly. And what's interesting though, is I think a lot of us had the sense when, then when we started, attending parties outside and even, at some of the right events inside, like the sense of a download was actually already inherent in the music. Because we sort of felt that like this music was being beamed down from another planet, and that we were downloading the tracks.
Oh my goodness! I remember that triggers a memory of my first outdoor party where I heard this music, and it was also the first party I ever saw a DJ playing not records. They had CDs, and so I was looking, and the turntables were empty, and they weren't moving, and the sounds coming out of the speakers were just the most bizarre. And
exactly,
like beamed from space and out the speakers.
Exactly. And the thing is, I think that it's really important for us to remember, as much as this is really futuristic music, I think it's really helpful to remember our first impressions of it, because I think there's something in there where we get used to hearing this music, and now we're used to listening to it at home and on small speakers, and it's a whole other story when you hear it in that virginal state outdoors, with a big sound, or in a club with like the right, colorful sort of atmosphere, people and movement. That's part of, what's happening here, which you've got going well with the visuals, is what I noticed at that first event that Ollie Space Drive was playing at was, the movement with, people in this clothing. And it's like it was like they'd stripped their human identity off, and they had their own energetic signature that was flowing, and then there was all this color movement and therapy that was happening that seemed coordinated with the music. And so it was like not just a sonic experience, it was like a full body, full frequency, audio visual thing. So I had no idea what was going on, didn't even see the DJ the whole night. Like, there was no concept still, unless you were really familiar with this, of like, there's a DJ. Nobody was facing the DJ. There was no stage. They were there doing their thing, and what they
Just
were
the
playing at the
gremlin
time.
off in the corner making the weird sounds happen.
And I mean, and the thing is also, I mean, they're not necessarily like, I was like, maybe this is all happening live. Like I thought they're making the sounds, but what wasn't even clear to me is the fact that they're playing pre-recorded music, and that, how it was being, used. They were usually using, and Ollie I know was using at that time, these digital audio tapes, which is, how they would produce.
Put it on that camera there.
How they would produce, how they would produce from the studio. They would digitize,
Yeah, there you go.
this is what you would use to make a CD. Like that's where the master would be before they had digital files. And then, this is like better than CD quality. So they were mixing with, we can take a look at the player, so usually, Sony made these portable DAT players that, there we go. They probably had no idea that 90% of the market for these machines was people who were going to play this stuff outdoors at these psychedelic events. And that was because, if you're in actual Goa in India where it's like roasting and sandy, you're not going to play vinyls.
The records melt.
The records would melt and they get sandy and it would be, uneven surfaces. And so they did play cassettes, but then, when it started moving up, they were playing off of DATs. And that's how I got into when I started playing. I was playing off of DATs as well. So, so it's just interesting because, you're saying you got it on cassette, but I was... it was the whole, like, where can I find this music? How can I actually, get my hands on this stuff? And one of the special things about it was you had to go to the event to actually hear it. So there was kind of that special thing of, like, almost not being able to hear it at home made the events extra special.
For me, I was going to, like, raves where they were playing house music, and I'm like, this is fine, but like, and I had the music at home, and I never, it took me years before I like understood why that music wasn't getting played at those events. And I mean, a big part of it is that it was Halifax. I'm from the east coast of Canada, which is about as culturally far away from Goa as you can get. So it's kind of it's kind of lucky that I stumbled upon this music. So should we play some tune? Should we play a tune to get started? You mentioned that you wanted to start with this Infinity Project tune.
Yeah, so Infinity Project, this is a DAT of some of their stuff from 94. This track was produced in 1994. For me, it's insane to think that this was written 30 years ago, because I think musically, in terms of the complexity and the layering, one of the things that attracted me to this music was, I'm from a classical music background, and I was like, wait a second, I can actually go to a club and hear a music that's interesting and creative and pushing boundaries instead of, like house or whatever, which for me is like, it's got the same chord and it's not resolving and it's not going anywhere, and when's it going to actually move? And this does. And this is, there's three musicians here. We've got Simon Posford and Raja Ram, who are now known as Spangle for their, sort of their electronic, world music, otherworldly music kind of fusion, along with Graham Wood. And it was Raja Ram and Graham Wood who were the Infinity Project, and Simon Posford was working as the engineer in the studio. And there is a little story behind this particular track that's fairly psychedelic, because they wrote the first part of the track and they weren't able to really go, felt creatively blocked, and they knew it needed to go somewhere in this middle section, which is very classical. You have the first section and then there's a middle section that's different, and then sort of you go back to the first. And so they were like, I wonder what we could do. So it was sort of more like a bicycle day experience that they had. So they decided Dr. Hoffman needed to get involved. And so they did that. And then all of a sudden, this unbelievably psychedelic, otherworldly middle section wrote itself through them. And they actually have a sample. You can hear Dr. Hoffman speaking in there. And, just keep in mind, like, this is 30 years old. And I think, when you talk about like going to house events and thinking like, well, why aren't they playing this good music? And, now I look at stadiums being filled with really basic EDM, and I'm just like, would people's heads explode if they heard music that's this complex? Mine did 30 years ago.
The funny thing is it's coming back. We'll talk about that more after. Let's put the first tune on, and
awesome.
Who do we get? We got ourselves Beer Bong 89 DJ, Fullerene Dream. We got a brand new chat from Tigma.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is that a friend of yours?
Yeah,
Okay, nice. Welcome in. Welcome to the
in.
show. And let's get started with the Infinity Project. This one is called Binary Neuronaut. And let's go. No, that's the time code. Is it just really quiet? Where's the sound?
Mind over matter. Entering atmosphere.
All right, so we did manage to get some of the music out there to you people. This has been proving to be a more challenging than expected edition of the Eternal Bike Rave. I haven't really tried the podcast format before, and yeah, we're learning as we go here. The saying is, if it doesn't glitch, it isn't Twitch. So we're just proving the medium here. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm gonna turn down my monitor. Just ever so slightly. How are we doing now? Okay, that's better.
That seems good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So yeah, that was the Infinity Project. They are definitely one of the originals of the genre. And that started when Roger Ram went to Goa in like 1988 or something.
He was a bit later, I think 90, maybe 91.
I know that Simon was quite a bit later.
Simon never went to Goa.
I mean, he eventually went to Goa, but
Simon didn't go to Goa, to my knowledge. So that's what I remember him telling me.
Huh.
Graham Wood did.
Okay.
And so that's where he and Raj, I can't remember if they connected in the UK or in Goa, but, they obviously were going there. They were definitely both in Goa. I think Graham might have been there before Raj. But yeah, Simon, is wild because, again, you look at, he's considered Simon, Hallucinogen, who, now, he's still considered iconic. His, show off this gorgeous, vinyl set that's just come out of all of his, these are his incredible singles.
That is so
this is a great
amazing
piece of work.
Oh my goodness. Are we gonna play one of these records right now?
Maybe.
Right now?
I don't know.
Should we play
right
one? No.
Maybe we could. Yeah, I think let's wait. Let's see where we go in the chronology. But I never went to Goa. I played in Goa on the 30th anniversary year of me getting into Goa music, and it's this is where it's not about the place per se, although there can be magic. In a sense, I was lucky. It is a state of mind and state of being. And so, I was lucky because I went to parties in Japan where, the production was great. The energy of the folks involved was really, really great, certainly in the first few years that I was there. And so the vibe was amazing. And, there's a grittier, style in Goa, and there's a whole evolution of music. And I think... there's a little too much talk about this is what Goa Trance is, or this is what Goa Trance is. It's this style, or it's that style, or the other. And there's a whole range, and there was never any concept back then in Goa itself that, you can or can't play this track at a party. You always had a sense that's this will go well over here. And so there was a whole blend of, they were doing some, there was techno, and there's what they call now proto-Goa, and Belgian New Beat was one of the sort of formative influences of that sound. And so, Simon Posford did not need to go to Goa because he had the sound and he had it, and he didn't have any formal musical training. And, he also told me, he's I just made what sounds good. I was yes, but what you think sounds good actually is good. Whereas what a lot of people think sounds good is not necessarily as good. And so, he created that epic, iconic track LSD that was sort of the anthem for a lot of folks, and marked a turning point towards a more sort of streamlined, synthesized, lasery, extraterrestrial kind of sound, which I think is also evident here in the track that we just heard.
LSD. That was one of the cornerstones of the Goa set that Paul Oakenfold played on Radio 1 in 1995 or something. So I've read anyway that made Goa Trance almost maybe sort of kind of crossover. It got really big for a few years.
For a bit of a flash,
and that was.
Yeah, because Paul Oakenfold, he was a major DJ, and he got bitten by the bug, and he went to India, and he experienced, what it's like to hear this music outdoors instead of just in a club. Mm-hmm. And it is very different. You change the setting, and, the whole experience of it is completely different. Especially, I think, excuse me, hearing electronic music in nature. There's a kind of whoa, how is nature this form of technology? And you're experiencing, everything moment by moment, and seeing, how the light changes, and that whole experience from the darkness to the light and the light to the darkness and so on. And so he wrote about it really evocatively in the CD booklet notes for Concept and Dance. Did you get that CD?
Yeah,
Or an
I
LP?
think I've got.
So it was one of the earlier ones. The first one that I got, first CD that I got was this Dragonfly one. This is the actual like first one.
Yeah, or Ornata 1.
Yeah, which I didn't say one because it was the first one.
Right.
You know, just like, it's like, things didn't say BC because they didn't know it was before Christ because he wasn't around. So but the second CD that I got was this one, this Concept and Dance. And Paul Oakenfold wrote, this booklet about the magic of these outdoor events. Now, Ben Watkins from Juno Reactor, who predates this a bit, and he was always at the leading edge and never really fit in the Goa mold. But he said that, he started making music with Mike McGuire, who was DJing in Goa. And so Mike would go there, and he knew what worked on the dance floor. So then he came back from Goa, and they produced High Energy Protons, which is the first track on Juno Reactor's first album, Transmissions, speaking about, this whole concept of messages from outer space and downloads and all of that. And so that was, in a sense, a track that was the first track that was written, or at least that we know of, where somebody saw the events, saw what works, and started writing music for those events. Because previously people were just taking records and music
and just taking the cool parts of songs and looping them on cassette tapes and stuff.
They were doing a lot of that, and a lot of sampling and sort of remixing. Ollie did that early on. Ollie from Ollie Wisdom of Space Drive.
Like there is some really spacey music that came out in the 80s. It like
totally.
Like I always knew about acid house and about sort of industrial being like the sort of the progenitors, but like there was a lot of synthwave that was playing, but like underground stuff, and then like we all love the voice samples, but like they were actually playing like bits of movies that they take.
Oh yeah. There
like
was it became a thing. I mean, in there, like the one that we just heard, you hear Albert Hoffman talking about, seeing colors much more brightly, and sound goes through your whole body and all of that. And Stefan from Total Eclipse told me that, he always, and Ben from Juno Reactor, and Stefan was in Juno Reactor in the early years. He said that they would choose spoken words that were meant to trigger a response in your consciousness, in your state of being when you're in that, a really receptive state, and really open-minded on, in that trance state on the dance floor. And so, the hearing, you're going to have a wonderful trip, in the beginning of High Energy Protons, and,
everything's okay so far.
Everything's okay so far, and that Lunar Juice track by Slinky Wizard, another Simon Posford creation, which, by the way, that was late 93. That track was written. I found the date when I was at Simon's once and saw the date on it, and it was late. It's like
I think of that as being like a late 90s track.
No. This is really wild because this music was so far ahead of its time. But, all of this is, part of what we're talking about here is the fact that, it was inspired by parties in Goa. It was played in parties in Goa. It's called Goa Trance. A lot of musicians rebelled against that term because they're saying, it started becoming narrower in terms of what the style was, and we can see that now in what's referred to as psytrance, where they took the word Goa out and quite logically put psychedelic trance and put it together and made it psytrance. But it's become a little also like, how come it's a little formulaic when the whole psychedelic mindset is meant to be, you're in the moment and you're sort of, not just doing what's already been done before, but having things be new and fresh. So
yeah,
it's kind of an interesting, some interesting shifts happening in that sense.
So we didn't actually talk about what we want to play next. Do you want to play another one of these ones that you
One of
picked
these
out?
older ones? What if we did Rhythmistek? I think so. Actually, that's an important one for a couple of reasons. So before Raja Ram got to Goa, I think you've got the speed up a little bit too. I think the master temp, this one should be 139. Yeah. It's funny, like the things that I remember again. It's like I can't remember, do I have my keys? Do I have everything? And then it's like, I remember the BPM of this track from 30 plus years ago. So this is, Ray Castle was in Goa in the 80s. So he was there early and before it turned into this whole, scene. It wasn't a scene. It was just whatever it was. Like again, you know.
Yeah.
And that was my experience again. You know, when I first came across this in '94, I was like, what is this thing? Like there's this, I don't know, like to like people seem to know what this music is, and how do we know what this is, and where do you find more of this, and all of that. And so he was in Goa as it was really forming.
Cool.
And so he made a few tracks with Nick Taylor, who was part of Prana, who, you know, Nick was experiencing this music in Japan. And then he went to Goa and he didn't like it because he was like, well, I mean, it's dirty and it's hot and it's messy and everybody's mixing, you know, the mixing is kind of sloppy. And he was going to these parties in a nice club in Tokyo where DJ Kudo, who was a master, who I got to hear as well, he was kind of the godfather of the Japanese trance scene. And seamless mixing. I mean, unbelievable mixing on vinyl. Like he would do things that was just, you know, it was magical. And
Goa Trance is not easy to mix.
it's not easy to mix. But he was also, again, he was outside of the envelope or outside of the container of Goa Trance. But that's kind of, in a sense, what Goa could be, is just outside of the box. So Nick was just sort of like, why would I want to go to a hot, sweaty, dirty, you know, sort of sandy place where the music doesn't sound as good, it's not on a good system and it's being mixed badly, when it can hear it so well done in Tokyo. But Nick was a major, and still is, a major producer and very creative. But at the time, you know, he was in the first version of Prana with Tsuyoshi, who was one of the first DJs that I heard also in Japan. And then when he moved to Australia, he made these tracks with, you know, Ray Castle. And this one for me, so in my podcast, which is now at like, you know, Retro Go Explorations, I actually started with this track. This was the track that I started with, because for me, this is almost like one of the most perfect tracks in several respects, that has a real otherworldly, very bleepy alien kind of, you know, framework. But there's also the storyline that you sort of hear these little bits and pieces chopped up, and then you start to see, oh wait, okay, later on you hear what I was hearing before was actually like predicting what's coming.
Nice.
And then there's all these different levels, and there's this like what sounds like this guitar riff, you know, extraterrestrial guitar riff coming from outer space, and it's just all these patterns that just really hit. And, you know, as we were talking about, like, we don't know where to get this stuff, I remember specifically being at this party where Cooney, who is the main DJ for the Equinox party group, he played it at like 3 a.m. outdoors when we're in this forest. There's like 100 people sort of surrounded by trees and on this mountain under the moonlight. And one of my friends came up to me and said, "Did you hear it? He played it." And we knew what track he was talking about. Like, awesome. We both knew. Awesome. So it was just like we knew that this is the track. This is it.
I love those moments. I can remember hearing a track at a show in 2006 and going to the record store the next day and being like, that really grindy one that the DJ played last night. Oh yeah, Murder Was the Bass. Here it is. Like,
I mean, you know, this is amazing. You know, it was just like the one, and there's often these tracks that are like the one. And so, you know, now for me, this just hits, and it's a completely different kind of music. And you know, if you listen to it with just listening to production values based on what you hear now in terms of, you know, the levels or whatever, you know, you can seem like it's a bit loose. But to be honest, when things were done with more analog equipment, there's something about things being a little less than, you know, precise than just with a micro centimeter kind of nanometer kind of situation that gives it some life. And it's still got a very digital, very otherworldly feeling. I just think it's,
All right, let's
amazing.
go. So we got...
so it's called Stellium.
Stellium by Rhythm Mystic.
All right, so we'll start that at the beginning. What is that?
All right, let's fingers crossed it works this time. Let's go.
I think we've got the sound.
Yeah, that sounded like it was working. All right, everyone, here we go. amazing.
I mean, this is really music like from another planet. We just did not know what was hitting us when we heard these. Listen to these sounds.
It still sounds futuristic to me, personally.
And it's 30 years old.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. Like there's human beings that are 30 years old. It's like,
Yeah,
that's like,
there are probably people tuned into this show right now that are not that old. So.
I know, this is wild. And there's a lot of fans. I mean, I remember when Mark Allen, so he was a major DJ in the UK, and I remember when he got back into DJing after he'd left the scene, and Facebook had just started, and he wrote, "Wow, I'm playing 20-year-old tracks to 20-year-olds, and they're really digging it." You know, it was just kind of wild. But I mean, do you hear what I meant by like some of those riffs? It's just like, whoa, this is just like being beamed down this like laser beam kind of.
Whoa, we got a new follow.
Hey,
welcome.
wow.
Thank you so much, Xtigma, for that very psychedelic follow.
That was noticeable.
Yeah, that's
Made
what
an
happens.
impression.
That is actually a sound that I took from the movie, the more recent Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie, when he gets blasted with the anyway.
But something that's cool about that is, like, I mean, as a kid, right, I was really into, I mean, everybody watched Star Trek. Star Wars was new. Like, I saw the first Star Wars movie, like, you know, I was 7 years old. I was into Doctor Who before it was cool, and it was all just geeks watching it, and now it's become, you know, Doctor Who's this big thing again. I was ahead on the curve with Doctor Who, but even though the production values were absolutely, like, you know, kind of low quality. But, you know, that whole thought of like time travel and other worlds and all of this kind of stuff is something that was part of our consciousness. And then hearing this music, you know, we went into this, you know, Tokyo, pretty futuristic city, and hearing like, oh my gosh, you know, why are we not hearing this kind of music in general? I have a friend who's in Toronto who's in a very other kind of, you know, social scene, and he absolutely loves this music. He's been listening to my mixes, and he's like, why aren't we hearing this music at mainstream clubs? He's asking that.
We're back. And there's so many reasons why, but
there's a lot, but it's quality stuff. I think, again, you know, I like to think I have good taste. Everybody thinks they have good taste. Nobody says, hey, I've got bad taste. But, you know, I'm coming at this from a classical music background. And for me, there's more complexity and there's more story in this music. And what was different for DJs of this music, and still is that, you know, prior to this, and still in some other scenes like techno, you know, there's very little that's going on, and it's up to the DJ to blend tracks to create something that's new and that's got a level of complexity. And there's a whole level of mastery, like, you know, full respect to the DJs who are doing that, because that's a whole other thing. With this music, the music is already, like, the tracks are already complete. There's a complete story. And then you're putting one complete story into, you know, another complete story. And it's like all these chapters or all these short stories, and they make this grand arc of what it is that you hear at the party. So it's all of these like mini novellas, or all of these, you know, unique chapters and short stories that are all, you know, this whole thing. And so at the end of that track, you know, when we started talking, there's sort of the outro, the opposite of the intro. Yeah. And a DJ wouldn't necessarily just mix the kick in, because you actually need to catch your breath, because you've been really going at it for a while. And it's just like life, you know, there's the ons and offs and the ups and downs, and, you know, you're dancing and then you're not dancing. And I think, you know, when people talk about beat mixing, I think, you know, I try to get more precise and say it's actually kick mixing, because it's keeping the kick going. But you can keep the beat going, and the way I would mix that track out is I wouldn't necessarily have the kick for the next track coming right away, but I'd have it lined up so that when it comes in, it's going to come in on the beat. And so the rhythm of the track is continuing, and the next track comes in accordance with the rhythm. So that's still beat mixing, it's just not kick mixing. And I think we need to have this breathing space, and I think the challenge now with DJing is there's a lot of, you know, just focus on technique, which is important, but where's the story? You know, and so, you know, we're having some technical issues here today. Okay, that's fine. You know, there's going to be, like, occasionally that's going to happen, and there's still the story.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. You can still hear what we're talking about, and I mean, I think, you know, most of the viewers here are familiar with this music. I'm super excited for the track that we got up next. This was one that was on an album like that. I had a very small selection of this music before I learned where it came from and what it meant and so on. And this album is
95
one
or
of them.
96? It was 96.
Yeah, Juggling Alchemist came out in 95.
That's
think.
right.
And I've only listened to that album like maybe twice in my whole life.
Right.
I'm just
So we're talking about Etnica.
Yes.
And the first track on that album, right?
It is, yeah. It's the opening track.
Screaming Butterfly.
And I wanted so badly to play this at Otherworld this past weekend, and then it wasn't in my record bag with me, which no excuses. Nowadays, like our record, like we used to carry crates of records around. Now this is a crate of records.
I know.
I can carry 6 of them in my pocket.
This is insane. I mean,
Like,
I felt like, sort of on a Mission Impossible kind of thing. I bought myself like this metal briefcase. It's the kind you see the guys in spy movies that they would handcuff to their wrists, and I had all of my DATs in there, and I had, by the way, I'll just tie in that one of the reasons, there's many reasons, and I'm going to do a video on this, that I chose the name DJ Solitaire
this is
if you can zoom in on sort of the DAT player, to get this aerial view.
do you want the top down?
Yeah, no, that's all right. So
I can zoom in on that.
when I was, choosing what music, I had this music all on these different tapes, and I had like 2 or 3 of these players lined up to do the mixing.
You got
And when you have these tapes like this, they're lined up, and it looks like the card game Solitaire.
Oh.
That you have like these different rows, and you're putting these cards, and it's like, okay, I played this track, so now I'm going to put that one there, and then I'm going to, and it was literally like this whole game of Solitaire. Now there's a bunch of other stuff around it as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But that was kind of part of it. And so this track though that you were talking about now, Screaming Butterfly. So I still remember which part. This is again the weird thing that we have these profound memories of being marked by this music, and how is it that I can still remember Cooney playing this at like 5 a.m. on the latter part of this party, and I was at the back of this sort of thing. It was this one party I went to in Kawasaki, in outside of Tokyo, and I still remember it was in like late '95. And I remember just the tribal rhythm and this tribal, like this anthemic kind of thing. And Etnica, I know the band, I know the musicians. I'm very good friends with Maori, who's one of the 2 active musicians in the project, and we've talked a lot about this track. And I played it
when I went to see Pleiadians in
that's
Seattle.
right. Maori was there.
Mark took a picture of
I know.
me.
I was just like,
so excited.
Okay, wait,
for me.
you need to meet him. I was like, I know you're like one of the biggest fans of this. So I was like, yo, dude, come meet Maori. So that was a fun night. But this is a tough track to play, because it's like, what is it, 132?
Yeah.
132.96.
So if you pitch it all the way up to +8 on a turntable, if you've got it on 33, well, no, either.
Yeah.
+8% is 144 beats per minute.
Yeah. Which we don't want to do. So
actually, it's closer to 146.
Which is the standard speed for a track now. So the thing is, when you were playing off of DATs, if you're using these tapes, there was no pitch control or speed control.
I was going to ask you, actually.
So you had to be really creative with your mixing. And the way you did that was, there was that outro we were talking about in the last track, and then you would sort of do this kind of creative blend, and you learn how to mix different musical elements together. And some people, some people were really good at it, and how they managed to sneak sometimes the kick in really quite quickly. While the other one was fading out. Domino, who you've probably heard, she lives in Prince George now. She was a legendary one. She was opening for Juno Reactor when they were playing in stadiums in like '95. She grew up in Goa. She was one of the last DJs I knew who was like mixing off of these. There's a fellow a French fellow, DJ Vagator, who still plays off of DATs. But Domino's like mixing. She could just really do some creative mixing like that.
Wasn't Gil still on DATs right to the very end? I think.
I'm not sure if he
he's
was.
He's gone
now. He got into the high tech thing and everything.
Yeah.
So I think he was playing a sort of a different style completely. So I'm not sure that he would have been doing off of DATs. He might have been, but Screaming Butterfly. This is an example though of a track that's like 132, which is so unbelievably slow now. And if you drop it at the right time in a flow. I played it just as the sun was going down in Hungary, and we were really in the trees. There's a bit of film footage of that particular one, cool. And it was like I was really timing every day. I was there 3 days before my set, and I was just watching. Okay, what time does the sun go down? And when's this going to time in my set? And this one, I mean, it's just one of the super hypnotic things. And for the name Etnica, they're Italian, but it's ethnic. It's kind of like this extraterrestrial ethnic flavor. You know, if we think about ethnic as something from another culture on our planet, and here we've got something that's like really like from another culture on another planet. There's a very, I mean, what's the name of the album? Alien Protein.
Alien Protein, yeah,
You
exactly.
know, I mean, they were full on into the extraterrestrial vibe. And this track, I think, really captures a lot of that. It's a beautiful track.
Love it. All right, let's go. Screaming Butterfly from Alien Protein, the opening track
By Etnica.
by Etnica. Let's... All right, the microphone off. Amazing intro to an amazing album. We could just sit here. We could just listen to the rest of this album instead of having the rest of the show. We could just play Alien Protein.
But that's what this music is like, though. Like, again, first of all, pre-internet and pre-ADD, sort of like, all of our devices and everything being online.
Back when we had attention spans.
When we had attention spans, we would sit and listen to music and do nothing else. Like, that's all you did. You just sat, you put an album on, and you just listened, and you completely zoned out, and you listen to what the heck is that unbelievable track we just heard? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And and there was also that level of engagement at the events. There was a lot of no photos allowed.
Oh, okay.
So in Goa, there was a couple of people who were allowed. There's a little bit of film footage that exists from 92 or so, and a few photos that were allowed. It's very specific, limited cases where people were allowed because it was meant for people to sort of basically go free and not have any inhibitions and just be able to sort of express themselves fully.
It was like a lot of nudity back then, I believe.
Well, it might have been that, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about that. It was really just about the whole, everybody's in their zone. They don't want a camera in their face. They don't necessarily, people would take photos after parties or wherever they were, but it wasn't like this whole thing of documenting everything, which now, of course we wish, there is some amazing footage, and I've got actually some Etnica in Bali, sort of around 97 or so. Very colorful. It was much more colorful back then, sort of as per our fractals. But people weren't busy experiencing things through a screen or really so focused on preserving something for the future. They were really there experiencing it now, which is kind of the whole, that whole mindset.
I'm glad that there's been significant backlash against that, especially in the underground scenes. You go to a lot of raves around town now, and they put stickers on the cameras on your phone. Some people take them off, but the point isn't that you can't take it off. The point is like, be here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. People are kind of amazed, in my show. I mean, I have kind of a really great memory because I was so engaged with it, and I simultaneously knew this was important. Like, this was the wild thing about being in the scene as it was evolving, and recognizing the value musically and socially and so on, as well as individually, that I was paying attention to sort of what was going on musically, and I was paying attention to the light and what the DJs were doing. And so I still remember, so-and-so played this track at this point, and, I still have this crazy memory, but I was absolutely really in the moment.
I mean,
at the same time.
As DJs, it's kind of like that because it is important to us, like in a different way. It's like when I was a chef. I used to be a chef, everyone. Ho, ho. I used to be able to remember like details of meals that I had years prior, and like I when you get into creative space, when you have that additional discernment, then the details stick in your brain.
Absolutely. So I mean, this was those events, it really stuck, and you were really present, and that's how I can just remember that. And it wasn't there was unfortunately not lots of documentation. There is film footage from a couple of parties that I was at in Tokyo, and one of them in 95, actually they were playing the track that we're going to listen to next. Yes. And it was pitched up quite a bit, and it was the wildest, most unbelievably just crazy reaction going on. It was one of the, it was a tipping point in terms of crowd attendance, because often the Odyssey parties I was going to, they would get, when I first started going, it was 20 people, 30 people, and then maybe 50 people, and then maybe 100, and this one there was like 700 people. And so it was a bit of a change, because Mixer Master Morris was there playing in the chill out room. So this was also where the events had more than one room. There was a chill out room, so again, you could go have your breather, and then you come back to the dance floor, and it was, Odyssey was great for that. And so, all of a sudden there's 700 people. It was just absolutely off the hook. And this track was playing, and it was just electric. And it sounds, for however amazing it sounds listening at home, and as we're going to sort of be playing it here, it was a whole other thing on a big system and with the atmosphere of the room. And it's just, it was this giant cavernous place, and everybody's just, hundreds of people just completely going wild. Yeah,
that's all of our music. I mean, that's techno too. Like techno at home is not, it's like, it reminds you of what techno is.
This is it. I mean, it's a little bit like,
even Goa Trance in a club reminds you of what Goa Trance outside is.
Well, exactly. But I mean, you brought up the food thing, and that's kind of like, like you have fine dining, and, you're not having filet mignon every night at home. You're not having like, it's not Michelin star stuff that you have every time.
Yeah, your ears couldn't handle that either.
Exactly. And that's the thing where I actually think it's been a bit of a challenging, unexpected, unintended consequence of the availability of this music is people listen to it too much at home, and then the event is less special. And I think there's a lot of things where the event, like I used to look forward to this, Odyssey was every 2 weeks, and then sometimes there was a party on other weeks, and then sometimes not, and I was just it was this anticipation for an event that had meaning, and where you were really looking forward to hearing something new, maybe hearing music you knew, but you were there to experience a story. And there was this whole sense of that specialness, not like, oh, what's going on this weekend? It wasn't quite the same thing, and it still had this real value that I think now, like anything human over time, hedonic adaptation kicks in, right? You get used to something and then it becomes
hedonic adaptation. That's your word of the day, everyone.
Ding, 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 ding,
oh,
ding.
I love it.
So it's, you get used to stuff, and that's where things that were used to be special now become same old, same old. And unfortunately, I think that happened for a lot of producers. It happened for a lot of party people, where the drive and that inspiration stopped being there. And then
You're just going through the motions.
And not necessarily intentionally, but, it's just you turn the volume down like a couple of % each time, and then it's, the quality of the energy changes. So I think that's where, it's important that we have, of course, folks who get really passionate, really inspired. Like a lot of it that you're hearing is going to be very different. It's not just the technique of the mixing. It's like, what is the person bringing?
Yet the intention behind the like, why this track? Why now?
This track? Why now?
Yeah.
Again, Ollie from Space Tribe told me, there's some of the glimmers of insights that I got from him. One of them was, he said the DJing, he said it's 95% of its track selection.
Yep.
It's just like right track, right time.
Right track,
and
right
that's where the skill is. It's not even the mixing skill. There is that. There's another level that you're listening for, but it's like creating that sort of story flow. But it's also the why. And I actually mentioned to him, I was like, yeah, but I also remember when you played that track from 96 over in 97 in London, and people were like, oh, it's too old. He's like, right track, right time. Like it was actually, and it really was in the story. And people went off. And one of my friends who was actually there, who was always after the new music, here's Ollie playing a track that's a year old, which is like a no-no in London. And he was completely losing his mind, going like wild for this track that he knew, because the energy of Ollie was so different.
Imagine how much trouble we're in now if we can't play a track that's 1 year old.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is another story. And also, like nowadays, though, I mean, that was within, like certain scenes it'll be like that. And then right now, there are parties exclusively in a lot of countries where people just want to hear this music from the 90s because they know there was something special that was imbued in the music making, because it was that drive to make the music that is actually part of the recording.
I really hope that I really want to question you about specifically the ZNA gathering, but maybe after this track we can talk about that a little bit, because that's a very exciting topic to me.
Yeah, that's quite an event.
Yeah, so next up we're going to play a track that I didn't hear until much later, but I did hear this track and got a CD that it was on, like before I learned about the whole rest of Goa Trance culture. Total Eclipse, Transparent Mind. I got this on a CD of mostly hard trance. But then it had this one, it had Double Dragons.
Okay, yeah.
And it had like a couple of other Goa Trance tracks, and then the rest of it was all like German hard trance, like sort of proto happy hardcore, if you will. Like not happy hardcore, but like, in a couple years later it would be kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this one I heard the doof track at a party, and then I went the next day to the record store and I was like, what was that? And he sold me the compilation that it was on, and this track was on it, and it's so good. This was one of your early
one of my earlier episodes. I did this one, but yet I also didn't get my hands on this till much later. So it was issued in 95. The film footage from that party I was just talking about is 1995. I absolutely did not have this in my collection until at least 96, if not later. I was just, because I wasn't buying vinyls, and whatever I would like go copy my friends' vinyls onto DAT, or I would, so my collection was kind of random.
I got this on a CD called Rave Mission Volume 7 or something.
And another FYI on this is, first of all, we used to spend a fortune on these CDs, right? So we'd spend $20 or $30, and we're talking 30 years ago, that was like, triple the cost. So you're spending $60 in the hopes there's going to be something good on it. And you couldn't listen to it beforehand.
Yeah, exactly.
So you would buy, this is old man shakes fist at cloud kind of situation here, where it was like...
We walked uphill both ways to the rave.
Back in my day, we were like still dancing at dawn. Honestly, these young whippersnappers were like just, taking it too easy. But, I would sometimes buy a CD just because there was one track on there that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't this free download, or you just, get to go to YouTube and listen to it for free, or get to listen to these two guys on a podcast, or like talking, playing it for free. It was like, no, I need to have this. And that was the only way. So we should listen to this.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's put it on. All right. Transparent Mind by Total Eclipse.
Beauty.
Definitely some of the blueprints for like what I think of as like Goa Trance.
With a bit of that good synthesized guitar sound, like what we heard before.
Yeah, here we go.
Candor and paranoia. If your mind is open and transparent, then nobody has to be afraid of you. You don't have to be afraid of yourself. mind is open and transparent, then nobody has to be afraid of you, and you don't have to be afraid of yourself.
All right, everyone. There we go. Oh, I'm going to turn those speakers off because listen to that buzz. Hang on. Let's just
get started.
Yeah.
Get the sound set up. So,
all right.
Again, that track for me, it's such a great track, but it's so much more exciting when you hear it played out.
Yeah.
It's just not even the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, and there's this electricity, and it's that guitar that's kind of a guitar, but kind of not. Total Eclipse. I mean, I first heard their music that I know of in '95, and then I got to know Stefan. He moved to Tokyo actually same week that I did when I moved back the second time.
Okay.
A whole bunch of us descended back on Tokyo in '98, and we used to have like weekly hangouts. And then eventually on Dat Records, now Dat Universe, one of the labels I'm with, we put out like a 3 CD set of unreleased stuff, live stuff. And the thing that's also really cool, when the bands were playing live, they would use different synth sounds and different arrangements and so on. So you would hear a completely new version of the track. So it was like these covers, stuff. And there's some of this stuff released. And there's other versions that are also like not on here. That's just, it's incredible. And that was one of the things when if you were a DAT DJ, was that you could get music that wasn't released. There weren't CD burners at the time. You couldn't make CDs. People weren't mixing off CDs because the technology didn't exist. CDJ didn't exist.
Yep.
Now they have CDJs that also don't play CDs because it's just USBs. It should be a USB-J.
We lived through an entire era. Like I was an early adopter on CD, and CDs are done. Like
I hated them. I hated playing off of CD. It was really weird because on DAT, there's an imprecision because it's not a feather touch like it is on the computer, on the CD player. As soon as you hit play, it responds. There's this delay because it's more mechanical. And so you had to have this anticipation of there's a half second ahead and you couldn't change the speed. And so it was, you just really had to, you had to fly. Well. Yeah, but you also had to know the music, but you also had to sort of sometimes fly by the seat of your pants. But the advantage of playing off of DAT in the time before you could burn CDs and there was no USBs is you could have unreleased music. And so one of the things that, you had to be able to make a story. And so that was one of the reasons, you had your energy and your sort of story making ability. There's also the music that you had. And those were sort of the two things that really made a DJ back then in the scene. And I think to some degree still, but, you should. Well,
I mean, everybody can play, like, now you can just get a thing where you can play any track on Beatport off of your laptop. And it's just, like, I don't...
But where's the story? I mean, the problem is, until you've really heard, and I'm not sure, again, you find great DJs everywhere. They're not always the famous ones. The famous ones are not always the best. Just because somebody's unknown doesn't mean they're not great. I mean, there's all of this kind of stuff.
And great DJs have off nights too.
and exactly. And it's really important, right? That's something I know from my classical scene. You can have one of the most famous musicians, they can have an off night, and you shouldn't judge somebody just on the basis of one set. And I think that the standards that we use for that can be a little bit not always the best. But what the DJs would bring back then is, you could recognize, I remember when Ollie played in London, that party in '97, and he walked on stage. It wasn't really a stage, but, it was a platform. Somebody else was playing, and I could start to feel the ceiling lifting. And I swear, as soon as he hit the button for the first track, it was like the roof blew off. You could absolutely feel it was completely different. In one of my episodes
That's so awesome.
In one of my episodes a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how I was... at a certain part of this outdoor festival, and this track started, and my friend and I were both, this is Tsuyoshi playing, even though it's not his music.
Yeah.
Right? And it wasn't his music, but we could tell that it's Tsuyoshi because it was his energy signature. So, it was not the same thing. But, the live sets, that started coming into it, and I think it started creating a bit of a more monochromatic sound. Total Eclipse is different from a lot of projects because they have a lot of different sounds, so they never, there was always this amazing storyline at Nika as well. I think a lot of projects tend to have too much of the same sonority and the same sort of kind of tracks.
Synthesizers are expensive.
Well,
you can't just download a new VST.
Well,
you have to spend thousands of dollars on a synthesizer to get a new sound back then.
Exactly. Yeah. Back then, it was not like, it wasn't done on the computer. It wasn't, everybody had their different sounds because they had a different synth, or, you know, they would sometimes bring a synth over to, you know, and lug this heavy synthesizer over to somebody's studio and make stuff. But, you know, ZNA, I mean, we were talking about, you know, we're going to talk about that. A lot of these projects are going and they're making live sets, and people are really, there's a whole new generation plus the older generation that are really into just hearing this vintage Goa sound. And then on the last day, they'll often do, you know, for 24 hours, they'll do like, you know, the newer stuff in terms of, you know, what they see.
Okay, yeah. Though I've got so many questions about ZNA. First of all, here's me all this time calling it ZNA because I'm from Canada.
A lot of people do that. And ZNA, it's meant to sound like DNA. And they talk about this sort of, you know, a Zambu is kind of, you know, these tribal dance warriors. It's a kind of this term they use in Portugal. So it's sort of talking about, you know, this Zambu energy, or this sort of this energy that's in us, you know, as part of our DNA that sort of makes us want to dance to this music. So it's like our alien protein or alien
Cool.
DNA situation.
Yeah.
So it's CNA,
I remember having to explain to a lot. I think people have finally figured out that it's Xenon Records, like Zen. Everybody's calling it Xenon. No, like the element. No, it's Zen, like Xenon, like Zen.
Yes.
Or confusion about how to pronounce Aja's name. There's two J's. It makes the short J sound.
Yeah, that's true. Great musician as well, and really nice guy. So what were you going to ask?
So So you've been going for a bunch of years. I know that.
I started my first. I've played at every edition since 2015.
Okay, and how long has the festival been going?
It was running a few years before that. Okay. I can't remember how many. I think they might have done it for a small period every year, and then they went to every 2 years. And it started getting bigger. I mean, really from 2015 to 2017. That was the two back-to-back ones. I mean, it grew exponentially already.
Right.
So I saw it go from, you know, there was like a handful, like a few hundred people to really like start getting into thousands. And now it's like sold out, and they cap it at, I think, 5,000. But, you know, to be able to have the top, you know, creme de la creme. This is a festival where all of the retro producers from the time who want to play, but they want to play. they'll be upset if they're not booked for it. Because the atmosphere is so there. And in fact, Doof, who, you know, we brought up before. So if there's one thing that I am the most pleased at having accomplished in my years in the scene, it's that I knew Doof just to say hello back in the 90s in London. He was always very nice with me. But, you know, we didn't hang out or anything. But, you know, I'd see him at events, and it was always friendly, and we'd chat. And I had this crazy circumstance where I was at Tsuyoshi invited me to play at his house moving party, and it was like, why is one of my idol DJs inviting me to play? And it's like, you know, there's, you know, Simon Foster's there and Dick Trevor's there, and I was like,
no big deal.
No, but it was like, it was so nerve-wracking. I can't even tell you. No, but it wasn't really a big deal because there was like 3 people in the living room and everybody was else off somewhere else. So it was really like just this, you know, just that. But Nick Doof was there, and I was playing, you know, I was just making my story, even if there's nobody there. And he said, I've got like an unreleased mix of Destination Bomb that would go really well with this in my dad bag. And so he brings out, you know, his tape, and we cue it up together. It was just this magical experience of like, oh, there's like nobody here to experience this, but I'm experiencing this with one of my sort of favorite artists. And, you know, then after I played it, out comes the most beautiful track I've ever heard, which is completely different from the version that was on the record.
Yeah, I had that record.
It's not the same thing. And then, you know, afterwards, you know, we take the tape out of the player, I mix it out, and, you know, give him back the tape, and the tape goes in his dap bag, and I was like, oh, you know, he's like, goes off. So fast forward 16 years. We're producing on the DAT label, we're producing, you know, some retro releases, and I say, hey, you know, there was that time at Tsuyoshi's that you lent me that track, you know, you let me play that track. And this is a real Shaggy Dog story that we'll get back to ZNA. But you let me play that track, and
there's no way
you know,
we're not playing that track.
Now we might have to.
Do we have it? No.
We do. Yeah, actually, I do have it. There.
Yeah.
So
cool.
he was like, oh no, I don't remember that. And I was like, well, if you didn't get rid of any of your tapes, you've got it because you definitely played it for me. And then didn't hear anything back for a bit. So a couple of weeks later, I email him again. And then he said, oh, yeah, let me check on that. And then the next day I wake up and there's a file transfer email in my inbox, and it says, "This may be the droid you're looking for." And he sent me the full frequency copy, and I was like, oh my God. So we eventually managed to come up with this concept for Dat Records, where we put out his original album, which I was at the release party in November 96. And then we did an all parallel CD where it's an alternate version of each of the tracks from the original album.
Cool.
And so this was the impetus for this, and this would be still Gathering Dust if I hadn't, he hadn't given it to me, and if I hadn't had my sort of, photographic memory of like, of course, how could I not remember like this most incredible track?
Yep.
And it's the most gorgeous thing. So Doof refused to play for about 20 years.
There's no way we're not playing that next.
Yeah, we're going to have to listen.
We're
probably going to have to play that
That wasn't
one
the
next.
plan, but now it is.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also the way it would be at parties, and also for a DJ not having a plan set. Nobody had plan sets back in the day. Nobody had a plan set. You always just went spontaneous. Okay, what am I going to play next? So it's like our conversation here.
Unless you were recording a CD.
No, but nobody did it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't done. So where's it going? So ZNA, this has become the premier festival, and they asked Nick Barber, many times to play, and he kept on saying no. He finally said yes. So the festival sold out immediately, once it was announced that he was playing. And I was there, and it was the most amazing thing. I got some incredible film footage. I know him well, and so, we got to see him again. And he just said, yeah, this is the real thing. The vibe at this festival is that special. And he also said, I don't know why this isn't the version that I released initially, and why I released the other one.
He prefers
this one. This is the one that he played in his set. I got to play this one. I played this one in Goa. And there's some magical film footage at that moment. I'm actually getting goosebumps right now.
Awesome.
This is really, I think, one of the most incredibly beautiful, masterful tracks. And again, this is something that was just, gathering dust for
Amazing.
15, 16
right,
years.
Let's cue it up here.
Yeah, I guess we get to listen to this unexpectedly. A little bit of spontaneity. So here we go.
All right, everyone. Here we go. This is the alternative mix of Destination Bomb, and I'm going to clean up that metadata there, but you can see it on the screen. This is by Doof, 1998?
96.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's go. So
What a gorgeous track.
So good. Yeah, I can see why you're so proud to have made him remember that. To bring that to his
get it
mind,
out.
to get it out. Yeah.
I mean, and again, it just points to, in a sense, like there's stuff that's visible, there's stuff that's accessible that never used to be. Like that's always been kind of the case in history, right? Like in terms of information, in terms of, music or art or, technology. Look at how easy, what the technology that's available now, the accessibility of this music. And this was once just completely hidden away, and now it's available. Yep. And it's different, right? And the status of that changes in a sense. Like the status, it's not unreleased, but the quality of the music is still absolutely that's unchanged. It was, that was magic. And it's still a magical track.
Yeah. So I was just explaining that usually on this show we do a Goa feature. This whole episode has been one huge, amazing Goa feature. But the format for that feature is that we play a modern Goa track, and we talked about this a little bit about how the sounds from then are still now breaking ground, and what I like to do is I like to play a new one and then an old one, and so I think that I'd like to do that for this. We're gonna do our official Goa tracks of the week.
And this is gonna be a new one. So this is the Prana one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so at the last ZNA, I mean, generally ZNA is fully retro, and I'm known as a retro guy, and that's why they first brought me, to ZNA. And then the promoter gave me quite a compliment because he heard one of my tracks, one of my mixes where I was playing newer music. And he said, you presented the new music as if it was old music, and I heard it as if it was, as if I was back in the 90s hearing something that was new. But the quality and the sounds, it wasn't like the generic, like people accuse modern psytrance of being generic. There's a lot of music that has the same kind of bass line, da-da-da-da-da-da. I have nothing against that bass line specifically, but I do have an issue when, every track sounds the same. And it's all the same sort of synth sounds and so on. So not a big fan of that. So I think that's where, and if it's a live set, again, that's one thing because the producers have their own sound. But for a DJ, I think, what you want to try to do is, create something so there is some uniformity, but it's the differences. And this highlights, it's the same thing as, we all have something in common on the dance floor, but we also have our differences. And I think the music should reflect that. So I'm at the last ZNA.
Yeah. Are we gonna go?
We're gonna go over this. I'm just gonna give the background for how I got this track, because Tsuyoshi would always start his DJ sets with a track nobody else has. And so he was at ZNA. He was playing a mixed old tracks, new tracks kind of set. And he started off with this track. And I was like, what the heck is this track? He's like, this is a new Prana one that me and Nick did. And I was like, I don't want this because I'm playing a new school set at ZNA. And I was like, I would love to play this track. And so when Tsuyoshi was in a good mood, I was like, can I get that track from you? And he said yes. And it arrived. And I was like, I have to play this track. And this is coming on the new Prana 30th anniversary CD set of Sense of Unities. It's got a bunch of new tracks. Okay. And their music is, all the musicians there have been evolving their sound, but there's still some of the key elements from the Goa sound, but it doesn't sound like they're just trying to recreate. It's really new stuff. This is slower, like Screaming Butterfly, right? This is 135. Yeah. It's got some of that rockish sound that we heard in Nick's track from 30 years earlier, right? In Stellium. Nice. And it is just a mover and groover. We can even start the intro.
Let's go. I'm so excited to hear this, you guys. Yeah. I think you played this at a party that I attended in the fall.
Yeah, the promoter as well. He heard me play it at home. He's like, you have to play that track because I need to hear it on a big system. It's really something. And I mean, what the music would often do is what's happening as it starts now is, there's just some atmospheric noise, and sometimes you would set the stage with just some non-dance sounds, and it's great for opening a set.
Yeah, love it into
the air.
Yeah.
But you're going to hear a bass line. It's like something 1970s, dance song.
Yes. Love a Goa bass line.
Awesome. Goa bass line. Yes. For me, this is the track of the year. And it's
Here we go. This is official modern Goa track of the week. This is Designer Machines by Kana. And enjoy.
Translation. Systems.
Liberate.
What a tune. Amazing.
Monster tune, right?
Absolutely exclusive Goa track of the week, everyone. So that's our modern Goa track of the week.
And it's the thing is, that's not your average modern Goa track. I mean, that is not. It's not like there's tons of music being produced that's that level. I think that's just, that's an all-time classic. And that's the thing, people say, it's like, oh, we're listening to all this music that's old, but it's like, yeah, but it's like, it's classic, just in the same way that, we listen to, great classical music or great jazz or great, pop songs. And for me, this is one of the ones that will stand the test of time. I think that's just a brilliant one.
Yeah. So as always, we're going to do a classic Goa track of the week right after our modern Goa track of the week. And this one is a classic that has just been re-released on vinyl that Solitare brought us. This is from the Hallucinogen. This is the second box set, right?
Second box set. So they put out his albums first. So his iconic 2 albums. So four LP set with the, 2 LPs for each album, and then 5 vinyls of all of his tracks that were from either on singles or just on compilations and so on. Some of them had never been on vinyl before.
So this one, I think, this one's from Phosphorescent.
It's from the Tip Phosphorescent track. I
had this on
That's
vinyl.
the one that dropped.
On vinyl.
Okay, so that was one of the all-time great compilations. That's the one.
Such a great compilation.
That was the one that dropped like as soon as I moved to London in September '96. That one came in October. I remember the first time I heard Tsuyoshi in London, he played this track. So the story of this one. So Simon did, it was 1995. He did the track Soothsayer. This one was produced and released in '96, and it's a completely different sound from the original. And DJ Andre was the label DJ for Tip Records at the time, and he was in the studio with Simon along with Raja Ram when he was producing this. And he loved it so much that he wanted to get a copy from Simon, and so he made him a DAT, right? Like these affirmation tapes with almost everything that was on that Phosphorescent thing that nobody else had. So Extreme and Psychopod, which is Coxbox and all of that. Yeah. And the title of the DAT was We're Not Worthy. And he called this track unofficially The Dog's Bollocks, which is the bee's knees, if you're speaking English and a little bit more polite than the British version.
200 people just came into the chat. I might like to point out, say hello to Thelestris, and thank you so much for that magnificent raid. We've got an absolute legend here in the studio with us today. This is DJ Solitaire, and we're just about to play the classic Goa track of the week on vinyl that he brought with us. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And let's go with the classic Goa track of the week. This is the
massive sounds,
the remix of Soothsayer by Hallucinogen. Let's let's
line this up.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Needles on the record. Old school.
All right. We're doing it for real. We're doing it for real.
Yep. Needs to be.
There are hundreds of universes. Energy inside your body.
yes, what a classic track that is. But if you've been tuned in since the beginning, we've been playing classic tracks pretty much this whole time. Like you were saying, you're thought of by the ZNA guys as like a retro guy, a classics guy. And
definitely.
This next track definitely qualifies. It is one of the tracks that was one of my first introductions to this music. I was saying about how I met somebody on IRC way back in the 90s, old text internet, and we mailed audio cassettes of music back and forth to each other. And one of those cassette tapes was this Silicon Trip album by here it is. Silicon Trip album by Shakta. And I guess you know a little bit more about this. This is Sebastian Taylor, right?
Seb Taylor, who's
Digitalis,
Somaton, Hibernation.
I had a bunch of Somaton records, by the way. They were not easy to get.
He was a great musician, and he got into just for a short, made some of this Goa music, and it's still so popular. Seb just brings a lot of heart into all of the music that he plays, and this one, Spiritual Beings in Physical Bodies, has this beautiful spoken sample, and it really, I think, encapsulates, just that spoken sample encapsulates how it is that we felt about this, psychedelic dance movement back in the 90s, and I think a lot of people still do as well, that, this is, that we're using our physical bodies to dance to this music, and we're also connecting to our spiritual nature in our experience of that. And it's quite a beautiful track.
All right, awesome. Let's get straight into it. This is Shakta with Spiritual Beings in Physical Bodies. I have featured this one as the Goa track of the week in the past.
It's well worth it.
Oh my goodness! We've got ourselves an intruder! Intruder alert! Intruder alert!
The membrane that exists between worlds, the seen and the unseen, the physical and the spiritual, and that we are spiritual beings in physical bodies. we are spiritual beings in physical bodies.
Oh yes, I listened to the audio cassette of this album so much. I used to put it in my mom's car that I would drive around like.
Okay, driving around to some of this music is just like, oh boy, I'm telling you, that was back in the day. It was like, this futuristic stuff, driving through. There's one track I'll feature eventually where, 6 years later, after I was driving around in Tokyo, like with this in the car, all of a sudden it shows up in a Matrix movie. And I was okay, this is exactly as I experienced it. And so I sort of imagined it. I was like, this would be really good in a movie. And I was like, what do you know?
Yeah.
And it was futuristic then and still now. But that's what this music is like.
So we're at the 2-hour mark of this show, and normally I do 2 hours, but we've been chatting a lot. We didn't play quite as many tunes, so we're gonna do one more track for the recording, and then we'll see about some overtime possibly after that. But we've got another special tune that you brought with you.
Yeah. Have you got it lined up?
Yeah.
This one, I did this, I think it was episode 101 in my Retro Goa exploration. So there's a long story about how I finally got my hands on it. And it was really, in 97, 98, before it was released. And still, it was just like one of the most unbelievable ones. And again, it's got a bit of a guitar thing. It's a bit of a cross species, kind of cross genre kind of thing. But I mean, when I first heard it, even just, the beautiful choral samples and the spoken voice I can't understand, there's this whole mishmash where it's like, the DJ's like tuning into some intergalactic radio station.
A theme that's been a theme tonight.
And it's just a full power, incredible track. If you want the full story of like behind the background, and then also, my quest for like about 4 months to get my hands on this. And then when I was like one of the few who finally had it, and again, it's not the exclusivity that's like the only thing. You listen to this music, this is still a track to play. I played this at my set in Goa in February 90. I'm getting my decades confused. What was last year? Was it 94? No, it was 2024.
2024.
There we go. Yeah, still sort of like, which decade am I in? And I mean, this is still just... always, it's not just that it gets a great reaction, it is just a massive piece of music and was a total game changer. So the Delta, traveling at the speed of thought. And every aspect of this track is beautiful. And just listen to this long, evocative introduction that starts.
Yeah, it's been nice. It's been nice playing tracks start to finish tonight. Get to hear the whole evolution with the intro and everything.
Yeah.
Like, and every track is a story, and every set is a set of stories.
That's exactly it. That's how you really get some voices and that's the other one. Listen to this one.
less on the Goa and more towards the psytrance.
I mean, it was starting to head in that way.
The Delta was always heavy, right? Like all of it. Like,
no, but it was different. I mean, their style changed after, right? But they did As a Child was earlier in '97. This one I first heard in November '97. It was hot off the press, but not released. And I got my hands on it in February, like after, I guess I said, like 4 months of like trying to find out who had it. And it was only released in like August of '98, so I mean it was probably a year after.
Okay.
So it was around. Yeah. But it was produced. It was around in '97.
Yeah. For those who had it.
Yeah, exactly, which was a handful. But wow, yeah, just magical music. And you know what, we're like everything that we've been playing tonight. I mean, it is kind of under the Goa umbrella, but it's all got. There's different flavors and different styles and different sounds. Yeah. Like I wouldn't play some of these tracks next to each other. You want to have like a sort of a transition to go, you know. Right. Into from some of these tracks to the others, and that's always the skillful thing, is how do you play a variety and blend them so it's not just like a hodgepodge. But
yeah, I hope anybody listening to this broadcast get the idea that like Goa Trance is actually quite broad. There's quite a lot of different sounds, you know, even back then, and
yeah, it was before the classification existed. I mean, you know, it just, for lack of a better term, they came up with Goa Trance. But you know, you see some early flyers and they called it space dance music. There was like there were all these other terms that they were using, and a lot of musicians just didn't like the term Goa Trance because you know it was referring to a physical location where they weren't when when they were playing this in Germany or in London or wherever. So. You know, it sort of anchored it to the place, but it's also, there's, you know, and as we were saying, you know, everybody's got their first, like, this is the sound for me because this is what I first heard. That sort of imprinting that we had when we first heard this music. Yeah,
exactly.
And there's a lot to it.
Yeah, got to hear a bunch of those tunes from you tonight. And actually, this next one, so we're gonna say farewell. It's been over 2 hours now. We're going to stop the recording, say goodbye to YouTube. And if you are on YouTube, by the way, you should check out DJ Solitare's Retro Goa Explorations series next. If you enjoyed this program, I'm sure that that will be right up your alley, and you can learn all the history, the lore, hear some awesome tunes. Just last week, you played a track by Beast, who turns out it was actually Simon Posford and
Process.
And
they only did 2 tracks together.
Tune, oh my God, so amazing. And I would have totally missed that. So
I mean, and it's, you know, it's interesting because there's always blind spots for me as well, because there's, you know, everybody bought the CDs that they got or the vinyls that they got. Nobody had like a fully comprehensive collection, or a lot of the times we'd listen at home. I was like, yeah, that's okay. And then you hear it played out and you're like, oh my God, that track is amazing.
It's a lot
it would happen so many times that I would go to this party and I would just say, I was like, oh my God, what is this track? And I was like, God, I have this at home. Why am I hearing it so differently? So there's a lot of tracks that I've got that I still don't actually realize how great they are, because there's only so much time.
You have to find the right spot, the right time,
or you also just have to listen and go back and listen to all of your old stuff again and hear it new, and then say, hey, you know, I haven't listened to, there's a bunch of projects that like I just haven't listened to their music in a long time, and I would probably appreciate it a lot more now.
That's one of the things that Twitch has been great for me, is having a regular show. Is it's gotten me to go through my music collection and actually I've got a lot more music than I would normally think about when I'm trying to plan a set or whatever, and it's been great for that. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you here.
I hope that we can do this again soon. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. Let's hit a stop on the record.